Yes, Capitol Records. I just wondered if you had any information on the release date for Best of the Beach Boys Volume 4. Well, no, Best Volume 3 came out in 1968, and it's about time we get Volume 4, don't you think? Hello? I don't blame them for hanging up on me, because today's topic is the much maligned Best of the Beach Boys Volume 3. So let's figure out what went wrong with that. Actually, best place to start is my favorite part of the album, this cool inner flap that depicts almost all of the albums released up till that point. You could see the cool Beach Boys Party font up at the top with all their names. We'll get to the track list here in a second. The record itself is underneath this Pet Sounds image. There's a flap here where you would pull it out. I'm not a big fan of record sleeves that do that. On the back, picture there. The spine has a picture that kind of loops around. That is the same image from Best of the Beach Boys Volume 2. So we have our track list today. First part, God Only Knows, Dance, 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 409, The Little Girl I Once Knew, Frosty the Snowman, and Girl Don't Tell Me. Side 2, Surfin, Heroes and Villains, She Knows Me Too Well, Darlin, and Good Vibrations. Quite a mixed bag. If you remember, almost all the Beach Boys hits packages were at least somewhat reactionary. Wrong pile. Volume 1, released in 1966, was made to recoup the less than expected sales of Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds wasn't an outright flop, but it didn't meet Capitol's sales projections, so this was rushed out to kind of be the big LP hit for 1966. Best Volume 2, released in 1967, was made to fill kind of a dead space in their catalog and their release dates. There was nothing scheduled for that part of 1967 due to the debacle that was Smile, so they churned this out very quickly to fill that spot. Volume 3's genesis happened because 1968 was a very bad year for the Beach Boys. Their big studio album that year, Friends, released in the spring, crashed and burned, setting a new low charting point for the Beach Boys, charting at about 126, which for a group that had never had an LP below number 50, and most of them making the top 10, 126 was pretty bad, and Friends was met with pretty tepid reception, all told, mostly due to its brevity. And if you listen to some of the live 1968 tracks on the digital collection, Beach Boys Live 1968, Mike Love disparages this album as a bomb, and how it wasn't, worth really listening to. It's very strange. So this was rushed out quickly in early summer of 1968 to kind of hopefully do what Volume 1 had done for Pet Sounds. And that was to balance out a studio album that hadn't quite performed to expectations. Honestly, the biggest issue here, and one that for some people would shut this album down immediately, look carefully at this song list on Volume 2. Pay special attention to the bottom. Now look carefully at side 1 of Volume 3. You might notice something. She may be fine, that 409, but she doesn't need to be on 2 consecutive Beach Boys hits packages. And there were other songs, charting singles, even top 10 charting singles like Be True to Your School, that hadn't been on a hits collection yet. Why would they duplicate this song? It's just probably due to the laziness and also to trying to rush this thing out quickly. Nobody caught the fact that they were literally duplicating a song from the previous year. I don't know. That is one of the biggest strikes against this album. But there are a few things about Best Volume 3 that actually are kind of ahead of the curve. First of all, it is a career-spanning album. We go from literally their first song, Surfin', to some mid-60s hits like Dance, 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 to Pet Sound stuff, God only knows in this case. We have a pair of Smile or Smiley Smile tracks. And we have a relatively new hit, one that wasn't quite a year old, with Darlin and several things in between. So it's trying to cover basically the group's whole career up to that point, which is very unusual. Volume 1 and Volume 2 played it pretty close to the hilt, and they didn't try to branch out. They kind of chose clusters of songs, especially Volume 1. So it's nice to see something that's trying to be more career intensive, that's trying to span the saga that is the Beach Boys, which at that time was only about 6 years, so probably a little bit easier. None of their 1968 singles are on this, though. They cut off in 1967. Also, it's the first time that a rarity, or, not to this out of the sleeve, a rarity or a collector's item is used. In this case, The Little Girl I Once Knew is included. As I talked about in the last video, The Little Girl I Once Knew was groomed to be the big hit for late 1965. Much as Help Me Rhonda and California Girls have been big hits earlier in the year, it stopped at number 20. It was maybe just a little too artsy for the public, and a lot of DJs didn't like the way it kind of used like silence and long stretches instead of like being a continuing song. So it didn't really catch on, and Barbara Ann ended up being the big hit instead. But The Little Girl I Once Knew had never been on a studio album. This was its first LP release, so that was no doubt intentional. So maybe someone who didn't buy 45s could finally have that song. Okay, I'll shell out and buy this record so I can have this top 20 single. But it's kind of cool to see it here. I like that they included it. So there are definitely some other oddities here. And let's talk Surfin. Surfin, their very first song from 1961. That was just a record falling over. So we have their first song. Surfin occupies kind of a weird place in the Beach Boys catalog today, because it never really gets put on hits packages. Surfin is viewed almost more as a historical album, or historical song, excuse me, appearing on historical albums, I should say. So it's on, you know, Becoming the Beach Boys, all their early tracks, or something like, here's Lost and Found, another collection of just like the earliest Beach Boys stuff. And it's on some of the anthologies and box sets and things like that, like here's the 2-CD anthology, Hawthorne, California. It's on here. It's on Made in California and the 30th anniversary set. But Surfin' isn't really considered a Beach Boys hit. It charted at number 75. It was just something to get them started. You know, it gave them the resources and the experience and notoriety they needed to do Surfin' Safari, which would make them national, you know, icons. So it's odd to see it here, but I kind of like that they included it. Surfin's never really been in the live set either. It was in 1967. They brought it back for their 5th anniversary. And of course today, maybe Surfin's legacy is being remixed and redone on albums like Summer in Paradise and Mike Love's 12 Sides of Summer, which are making an attempt to turn it into like a rocker. There's all these jamming guitars and things like that that don't really work with, you know, this boom, boom, doop, 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 really simple vocal kind of bit there. You know, the Beach Boys, when doing Surfin', they were just teenage boys jamming out about, you know, an activity that they like to do. And it works in its simplicity because of that. If they'd done it when they were any older, it wouldn't have worked. But it's just that simple expression, I think, makes Surfin' work. So trying to turn it into some pumped up, fuzzy rocker really isn't a practical view, or a practical thing to do in my view. So, but it's interesting to see it here. I'm kind of glad they included it for something different. We also have the elephant in the room. That flap I showed you with all the albums excluded one. That was the Beach Boys Christmas album from 1964. The Christmas album produced some very fun and iconic Beach Boys Christmas tunes, Little Saint Nick, Merry Christmas Baby, The Man with All the Toys, and they did their share of Christmas Carol covers. For some reason, Frosty the Snowman from this album found its way onto our subject for today, Best Volume 3. I do not know why Frosty is here. It was never released as a single. It wasn't in their live set in the 1960s. It hadn't been done on television that I'm aware of. I have no clue why it's here. And a funny thing is, if you could see under the track list, there's a little copyright notice that indicates that both Surfin and Frosty were specially licensed from other groups for this record. So they went through extra time and extra expense to procure Frosty. Somebody must have really, really wanted that on there. Now it is a cover, and every album so far has had at least one cover on it. But why would they pick Frosty when they had a top 10 single in Sloop John B, or a very successful almost top 10 single in Do You Want to Dance? It's very strange, and Frosty completely messes up the tone of the album because it is in the middle, and to go from like rockers to this weird Christmas song doesn't really suit you know, the tone of the album overall. I should also add, as a little aside, about Surfin, the liner notes for Beach Boys Rarities indicate that Surfin was not intended to ever be released on an LP, that it was licensed at the last minute to have one extra charting single on the Surfin' Safari record, and that would explain why this one, I think, was licensed out again, because Surfin' is owned by somebody else. It wasn't a Capitol single. But Surfin' I think you can justify for its historical purpose. Frosty, I have no idea. I could explain away Louie Louie on Volume 1 and Long Tall Texan and Little Saint Nick on Volume 2. I am stumped on Frosty for Volume 3. So we have a lot of A-sides. If you remember, Volume 1 was really big into B-sides, and Volume 2 was really big into complete singles, having both sides of the record. So we have several notable singles. We have the 1964 top 10 hit, Dance, Dance, Dance. After 6 hours of school, you've had enough for the day. Its B-side, Warmth of the Sun, had popped up on Volume 1. So Dance, Dance, Dance makes a lot of sense, and that was one I'm sure that kids loved back in the day. I mentioned Darlin before. Darlin was a relatively new song still. It was in their live set. The B-side, Here Today, was not included on any of the Beach Boys compilations. Here Today is from Pet Sounds. It's good that they put Darlin on here, I think, and that was a big live draw. It was a top 20 single, one of their more successful endeavors in 1967. It was the big hit song from the Wild Honey LP, and it fits well here, I think. We have, as the grand finale, Good, 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 Good Vibrations. What more can I say about Good Vibrations? Chart-topping single, one of the most ambitious songs ever made. Despite trying to cover their whole career, Best Volume 3 does not put the songs in chronological order, which is kind of strange. You know, you take the time to hit all these different eras for the group, but they're in kind of a jumbled order. But Good Vibrations is saved for the end, to be the grand finale, and that makes perfect sense to me. Speaking of Smiley Smile era tracks, we also have Heroes and Villains, which is a good inclusion. It wasn't as successful as Good Vibrations, but it's definitely a fan favorite. It was in the live set, and did, you know, pretty well on the charts all told. Then we have a few B-sides. Sirius XM did their poll, what's the favorite song amongst Beach Boys fans? God Only Knows. That's included here. The only song from Pet Sounds, weirdly, neither Sloop John B nor Wouldn't It Be Nice, which were more commercially successful, are not here. But it's nice to have God Only Knows. Again, that was in the live set. That was Carl Wilson's big number. Really nice to have it here. Then we get to the B-sides that aren't as popular. Barbara Ann, as I mentioned before and in the last episode, was a huge hit. Its B-side from the Summer Days, Summer Nights album was Girl Don't Tell Me. Girl Don't Tell Me did not chart. I can kind of see why. It's very much the anti-Beach Boys song. There are no backing vocals. It's almost all Carl Wilson's voice. In fact, it might only be Carl Wilson's voice. Very little instrumentation. It doesn't have an extended fade-out exit, you know, or outro, I guess you'd say. Instead, it just stops. And it doesn't even have that many lyrics. It's the same thing repeated. And it's an extremely passive-aggressive song, too, which is interesting. But I like Girl Don't Tell Me. And it's come back into vogue, I think, more and more. Brian Wilson has done it live a few times. It's neat to have it here, even though it wasn't really a successful song per se. It's often said as Brian Wilson's attempt to write a Beatles song for the Beach Boys to do. I like it, and I'm glad it's here. I think it fits well with a B-side that isn't maybe a big commercial success, but would be one that fans would really enjoy. We also have a 45 that I don't have, the B-side to When I Grow Up to Be a Man, which is She Knows Me Too Well. Both of those songs are on the Today album, as is Dance Dance Dance. She Knows Me Too Well, kind of an odd one. It bubbled under the Hot 100, peaking around 101, I'm going to say. It is a very melancholy song. It's about a man who abuses his, or a boy who abuses his girlfriend, but he knows that she loves him and she understands him and realizes just because he's jealous and insecure. It's a very weird song, and it's one that I can see why it wasn't a hit, because it is kind of an awkward listen. I don't think it's bad to include it here though, because it is a very beautifully written song and the Beach Boys perform it really well. Just a little off-kilter, I think. And of course 409 is on here. That was a B-side too. We talked about that in the last video, so it's weird, again, weird for a duplicate to be here, but not too bad or anything. It doesn't ruin the album. So Best Volume 3. If you remember, Volume 1 was a top 10 album. It went gold very quickly. Best Volume 2 would also go gold, and both would go beyond, actually. Both are at least double platinum. Best Volume 3 did not make the top 50. It did not make the top 100. It did not even make the top 150, and it did not go gold or platinum or anything else. Best Volume 3 crashed and burned. And because of that, people realized that maybe the Beach Boys were done, or about done, because nobody was buying this. I don't know if it's just because it felt maybe very rushed, or maybe there was a lot of negative press about it. Something I didn't dwell on in the last video was that a lot of these albums got released on obscure formats, like here's a reel-to-reel Beach Boys tape. But most of them made it past those obscure formats and got released on cassette and 8-track and CD. Best Volume 3 did not make it to cassette, did not make it to 8-track, definitely didn't make it to CD. It was such a failure that, barring those, reel-to-reel 4-track, formats that are so obscure, I don't even think people collect them anymore. Barring that kind of stuff, Best Volume 3 lived and died on vinyl. It was a commercial failure, a critical failure, and now Capitol had 2 Beach Boys duds in 1 year. This coming from a group that, was set to surpass the Beatles as the greatest pop group in the world. It's like, really? You can't even score a good chart performance with a hits package? I should note, though, it did get a second life in the early 70s. I did a video called Beach Boys on a Budget that talked about the Pickwick records from the 1970s. And here, this is Best of the Beach Boys Volume 3, but it's abridged. They snipped out Surfin and Frosty and released it as, kind of like a bargain bin thing through the Pickwick label. And this is actually a better listen because it doesn't have Frosty to mess it up. It has a really nice set of liner notes in the back, too. But yeah, so it did get a second life, but it took a few years. This made it to 8-track. I don't think it made it to cassette, but I've seen this secondhand a lot, so people were buying it. And it got released with the as a double album with the abridged version of Beach Boys Concert 2. You can check out my Pickwick video, Beach Boys on a Budget, for more info on these records. But so it did get a second life, and it did have at least a moderate measure of success, but it took a few years. And to cap off our 1968 saga, the final Beach Boys album for that year was Stacko Tracks. And Stacko Tracks failed so hard it didn't chart at all, and for a good 15 years was the black sheep of the Beach Boys catalog. Someday I'll do a video just on this, because this is its own animal, I think, and really needs to be covered all by itself. Last thing for today, the UK version. The UK version 14 songs, you can see them all there, just like the other two volumes, almost in chronological order, like the other two volumes. An exception was made for Do It Again. Do It Again was the big hit for 1968. One of the few things that went well for the Beach Boys, even in the United States, where Do It Again made the top 20. Do It Again was a huge hit worldwide, even bigger than in the US, and it went to #1 in the UK, and it was the Beach Boys song, certainly for a length of time there. So Do It Again was positioned first to sort of lead off this UK version. They had used up most of the greatest hits already, because while the US versions were very conservative, the UK versions doubled down on the hits, so that's why there aren't as many conventional hits on here. But you can see some of the tracks that were on the earlier US volumes, like Long Tall Texan and Catch a Wave, things like that. And there's some more recent stuff too, stuff from Wild Honey and Friends. So it's a pretty cool set. It's not quite as streamlined as the first two volumes. It's got a few more detours in a different territory, but all told, I really like it. I was impressed with it. And it has these liner notes here, or this article, which is a very odd read, and it talks about how Do It Again is the song that's going to reinvent the Beach Boys, and it's the greatest thing they've recorded, and how things like Smiley Smile and Wild Honey and Friends, those are interesting experiments, but they're not real Beach Boys material. You know, we need to get back to the sun and fun and surf. And this is important because it wasn't just Capitol executives who wanted the Beach Boys to keep that kind of teenage summer image. Fans did too, and they fought, you know, these stylistic changes that the group wanted to make. And sometimes we vilify Mike Love or Murray Wilson, but honestly, it wasn't just them. I would argue Mike Love wanted to change the group's image too, but it wasn't just them. You know, there were people who believed the Beach Boys should stick to going to the beach. So there you go. It's a really cool record though. I like it. I really like these UK ones. So in the end, Best Volume 3. Like the other two, it's kind of quirky. It's a little weird. But honestly, I don't think it's quite as bad as everyone says. The duplicate track is annoying. Frosty's an anomaly. But other than that, just has an interesting window into an older and more unique Beach Boys release. I think it's pretty cool. So, that takes care of our original Beach Boys trilogy. Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3. Volume 3's failure, guaranteed there'd be no Volume 4. So what are the Beach Boys going to do next? Well, in our next episode, we'll fast forward to 1970 and we'll see what they did. Hope to see you there. Until next time, my friends, go out there and catch a wave. Happy birthday!